Hello, and welcome to another video where we explore the history and myths of this world. Take a seat, lean back, and enjoy the video. The English Channel has always been a narrow stretch of water. At its closest point, it is only about 21 miles wide. On a clear day, the white cliffs of England can almost be seen from the shores of France. Today, ferries and fishing boats cross these waters without a second thought. Tourists walk along the beaches of Normandy. Children build sandcastles where soldiers once fought. But on the morning of June 6, 1944, these peaceful waters became the stage for one of the most important military operations in human history. Before the sun had even risen, thousands of ships were already moving through the darkness. Battleships, destroyers, landing craft, transport vessels. Together, they formed the largest invasion fleet the world had ever seen. Above them, aircraft filled the sky. Behind them, millions of people waited anxiously, knowing that the future of Europe depended on what happened next. For the young men packed inside those landing craft, the world had become a small space filled with fear, uncertainty, and silence. Some stared into the darkness ahead. Some whispered prayers. Some held photographs of their families. Many were barely older than children. They were farmers, factory workers, students, and sons. Ordinary people who had been asked to do something extraordinary. They knew what waited for them. Across the French coastline, German forces had built a powerful defensive system. Machine guns, artillery, bunkers, minefields. The beaches ahead were not just sand. They were a battlefield waiting to happen. The Germans called their coastal defenses the Atlantic Wall. It stretched thousands of miles along the western coast of Europe. Concrete fortifications overlooked the beaches. Heavy artillery was hidden inside reinforced bunkers. Steel obstacles waited beneath the water, designed to destroy landing craft before soldiers could even reach the shore. The Allies knew that breaking through would be one of the greatest challenges of the war. But why were they willing to risk everything? To understand that, we must go back. September 1st, 1939. Before dawn, German forces crossed into Poland. Tanks rolled across the countryside. Aircraft filled the sky. Cities and military positions were attacked with terrifying speed. Germany had unleashed a new style of warfare. A strategy built around movement, surprise, and overwhelming force. They called it Blitzkrieg, lightning war. The world watched as nation after nation fell. Denmark was defeated in a matter of hours. Norway was attacked by land, sea, and air. Belgium and the Netherlands were overwhelmed. Then came France, one of Europe's strongest military powers. France had prepared for another major conflict like the First World War. Its commanders trusted the heavily fortified Maginot Line. But Germany had a different plan. Instead of attacking directly, German forces moved through the Ardennes forest, a route many believed tanks could never cross. The gamble succeeded. German armor divisions broke through Allied defenses and raced toward the English Channel. Hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers were trapped. Their only hope was evacuation. At Dunkirk, civilian boats and naval vessels crossed the dangerous waters to rescue more than 330,000 troops. It was an incredible escape, but it was not victory. On June 14, 1940, German troops entered Paris. France had fallen. Across Europe, Nazi Germany appeared unstoppable. But one nation remained free: Britain. For months, German aircraft attacked British cities. London burned. Families sheltered underground. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed. The goal was simple: break Britain's will to fight. But failed. Britain refused to surrender. And that decision changed everything. Because Britain would become the launching point for the greatest invasion the world had ever seen. The road to Normandy had begun. By the beginning of 1944, Britain had become something it had never been before: an enormous military fortress. From the quiet villages of Devon to the ports of Portsmouth and Southampton, Nearly every corner of southern England had been transformed into a staging ground for war. Roads once used by farmers now carried endless convoys of tanks, trucks, and artillery. American troops poured into Britain by the hundreds of thousands. Canadians trained alongside British divisions. Polish pilots, free French soldiers, and troops from across the Commonwealth all prepared for a mission unlike anything the world had ever attempted. For the first time in history, nations from around the world were assembling one army with a single objective: return to France. Moving an army across the English Channel sounded simple. In reality, it was a logistical nightmare. The Allies weren't transporting thousands of men. They were preparing to move an entire nation across the sea. On the first day alone, more than 150,000 soldiers would cross the Channel. Nearly 7,000 ships and landing craft would support them. Over 11,000 aircraft would protect them from above. Every rifle, every tank, every medical kit, every gallon of fuel had to arrive at exactly the right place and exactly the right time. Inside Allied headquarters, the planning became obsessive. Maps cover entire walls. Engineers studied every beach. Meteorologists examined decades of weather records. Even the tides were measured. The invasion depended on conditions that nature rarely offered. Leading this extraordinary operation was General Dwight D. Eisenhower. His greatest challenge wasn't defeating Germany. It was coordinating an alliance made up of different nations, different commanders, and different personalities. Every major decision carried enormous consequences. The beaches of Normandy were divided into 5 landing zones: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword. Each one had a different mission. Each one would tell a different story. Across the Channel, Germany had spent years preparing. Concrete bunkers overlooked the beaches. Machine guns covered every approach. Minefields stretched across the sand. Steel obstacles waited beneath the tide, designed to rip open landing craft before they ever reached shore. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel believed the war would be decided on the beaches. If the Allies establish a foothold, he warned, Germany may never recover. His men worked day and night, turning Normandy into a fortress. But while Germany strengthened its defenses, the Allies were preparing one final weapon: deception. Fake armies, fake tanks, fake radio messages. Everything pointed toward Pas-de-Calais. And while Hitler watched the wrong coastline, the greatest invasion fleet in history waited for the weather to change. The storm was coming, not just across the English Channel, but across Europe itself. Before the first soldiers stepped onto the beaches of Normandy, before the first ship crossed the English Channel, a different battle was already being fought. It was not fought with tanks. It was not fought with rifles. It was fought with information. Because the Allies understood one simple truth: an invasion force could be destroyed before it ever reached the shore if Germany knew exactly where it was coming from. The element of surprise was not just helpful. It was the difference between victory and disaster. And so the Allies began one of the greatest deception campaigns in military history. The operation was given a name: Operation Fortitude. Its purpose was simple: convince Hitler that the main Allied invasion would not happen in Normandy. Instead, the Germans needed to believe the attack would come at Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France. It seemed logical. The distance was shorter. The coastline was easier to reach. And if you were a German commander looking at a map, Calais appeared to be the obvious choice. The Allies knew this, so they built an entire imaginary army. Across southern England, the Allies created a massive illusion. Fake tanks sat in fields. Fake aircraft stood on fake runways. Fake fuel depots appeared near fake military camps. From the air, everything looked real. German reconnaissance aircraft photographed these locations and reported what they saw. But what they were seeing was exactly what the Allies wanted them to see: a giant invasion force preparing to strike Calais, an army that existed only on paper. At the center of this deception was one of America's most famous generals, George S. Patton. The Germans respected Patton. They feared him. They believed he was one of the most aggressive and talented commanders in the Allied army. So when they saw Patton placed in charge of a supposed invasion force in southeast England, they believed they had found the truth. But there was a problem. The army under Patton's command was almost entirely fake. Its tanks were inflatable. Its aircraft were wooden. Its radio traffic was carefully designed to create the illusion of thousands of soldiers preparing for battle. The Germans were watching, and the Allies were performing. The deception went even further. The Allies used double agents to feed false information back to Germany. These spies sent messages claiming that Normandy was only a distraction. The real invasion, they claimed, was still coming at Calais. Every piece of information pointed Germany in the wrong direction. And slowly, the deception worked. German high command became convinced that Normandy could not be the main attack. Even after Allied troops began landing on the beaches, Hitler and his commanders continued to believe the real invasion was still coming. Those hours of hesitation would become one of the most important moments of the entire war. While Germany watched the wrong coastline, the real invasion force prepared in silence. Across Britain, thousands of soldiers completed their final training. They practiced climbing down rope nets in a landing craft. They studied maps of unfamiliar villages in Normandy. They memorized objectives. They checked their weapons again and again. For many, this was the last time they would ever see Britain, the country that had sheltered them, the country they had trained in, the country they were about to leave behind. On the evening of June 5th, 1944, the invasion force began moving. The atmosphere was unlike anything most soldiers had ever experienced. Some men joked nervously. Some played cards. Some wrote letters home, letters that many knew might never be delivered by the person who wrote them. They carried photographs of loved ones, small reminders of the lives they had left behind, because tomorrow they would enter a world where survival was uncertain. Before the invasion began, General Dwight Eisenhower delivered a message to the Allied forces. It was heard by hundreds of thousands of soldiers preparing for the most dangerous mission of their lives. He told them, "The eyes of the world are upon you." He reminded them that they were fighting not just for territory, but for the freedom of millions of people living under occupation. Every soldier understood what was at stake. As darkness fell, the invasion fleet began to move. The largest armada ever assembled was heading toward France. But waiting ahead was not only the German army. There was another enemy: the sea, the weather, and uncertainty. Because before the first wave could reach Normandy, thousands of soldiers would have to cross the darkness of the English Channel, and some would never reach the shore. While the invasion fleet moved slowly across the English Channel, another force was already heading toward France. They would not arrive by sea. They would come from the sky. Shortly after midnight on June 6, 1944, thousands of Allied paratroopers prepared to make the first move of the invasion. Their mission was simple: land behind enemy lines, disrupt German defenses, capture key roads and bridges, and protect the soldiers who would arrive on the beaches hours later. But unlike the troops crossing the Channel, these men would enter France alone, in the darkness, with no guarantee they would ever find their own units again. Inside the aircraft, the atmosphere was tense. The roar of the engines made conversation almost impossible. Men sat shoulder to shoulder, carrying heavy equipment, weapons, ammunition, radios, explosives, medical supplies. Many carried more than 60 pounds of gear. Every soldier knew the dangers. A bad landing could break bones. A missed drop zone could leave them surrounded by Germans. A malfunctioning parachute could mean death before the battle even began. Then, the red light turned on. The signal everyone had been waiting for. The aircraft doors opened. Cold air rushed inside. Below them was occupied France. At 1:30 in the morning, the first Allied paratroopers began dropping into Normandy. But almost immediately, the plan began to fall apart. Clouds scattered aircraft formations. German anti-aircraft fire forced pilots off course. Some planes released their soldiers miles away from their intended targets. Instead of landing together, small groups of men landed scattered across the countryside. Some found themselves alone. Some landed in flooded fields and drowned beneath the weight of their equipment. Others landed directly beside German positions. The carefully planned operation became chaos. But chaos did not mean failure, because these soldiers had trained for uncertainty, and now they had to adapt. One of the most important objectives was the small French village of Saint-Miraglisse. The village sat at a critical crossroads. Whoever controlled movement through the surrounding area. American paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne Division were ordered to capture it, but their arrival was unexpected. As American aircraft passed overhead, burning wreckage fell into the village. A house caught fire. The church bell rang. German soldiers and civilians rushed into the streets. And suddenly, American paratroopers began falling from the sky. The battle for Normandy had started before most people even knew the invasion had begun. Among those landing near Saint-Miraglisse was Private John Steele of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment. His parachute caught on the church tower. Suspended above the village, unable to move, he watched the fighting below. German soldiers fired at him, but Steele survived by pretending to be dead. Hours later, he was rescued by American troops. His story became one of the most famous moments of the airborne assault, a reminder of the impossible situations these soldiers faced during those first hours of D-Day. Further east, British airborne troops had another critical mission: capture 2 bridges over the Caen Canal and the River Orne. These bridges were essential. If German armored forces attempted to attack the invasion beaches from the east, these crossings would provide the route. The operation was led by Major John Howard and the men of the British 6th Airborne Division. Using silent gliders, they landed just meters from their objective. Within minutes, they attacked. The surprise was complete. The bridges were captured. The mission became one of the most successful operations of the entire invasion. Across Normandy, thousands of airborne soldiers fought a different kind of battle. They had no clear front line, no massive formations, no certainty about where the enemy was. They moved through forests, villages, and farmland. They destroyed communication lines, ambushed German patrols, blocked roads, and created confusion throughout the German command structure. Their purpose was not only to capture territory, it was to make the Germans believe a much larger force was attacking from every direction. The airborne assault came at a heavy cost. Many soldiers were killed before they even reached the ground. Others spent hours or even days searching for their units. Some fought without knowing whether the invasion at the beaches had succeeded. They were isolated, outnumbered, surrounded, but they held their positions, because thousands of soldiers were about to arrive on the Normandy coastline, and those men would need every advantage they could get. As the first rays of sunlight appeared over France, the airborne soldiers looked toward the coast. Behind them, the countryside was already in battle. Ahead of them, a massive fleet was approaching. Thousands of ships, hundreds of thousands of men. The largest invasion in history was no longer coming. As dawn broke over the coast of Normandy, the horizon disappeared, not beneath clouds, but beneath ships. From one end of the sea to the other, the largest invasion fleet ever assembled stretched across the channel. Nearly 7,000 vessels, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, landing craft, hospital ships. Behind them stood the combined strength of the Allied nations. Ahead of them, a coastline transformed into a fortress. In just a few minutes, history would change forever. Minutes before the landings, Allied warships unleashed an immense bombardment. For hours, naval guns had pounded German defenses. Heavy bombers had struck roads, bridges, and artillery positions throughout Normandy. The hope was simple: destroy enough of the Atlantic Wall to give the landing forces a fighting chance. But smoke, dust, and poor visibility made it difficult to know what had actually been destroyed. Many German bunkers remained intact, and inside them, soldiers waited. At 6:30 in the morning, American forces began landing at Utah Beach. Strong currents pushed many of the landing craft nearly a mile south of their intended position. Under different circumstances, such an error might have caused confusion. Instead, it became an unexpected advantage. The sector where they landed was defended less heavily than expected. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt, Jr., who landed with the first wave despite suffering from arthritis and using a cane, quickly assessed the situation. Rather than attempting to relocate thousands of soldiers under enemy fire, he made a simple decision. We'll start the war from right here. The landings continued, and Utah Beach became the most successful of the 5 invasion beaches. Just a few miles east, a very different story was unfolding. Omaha Beach. Here, American troops faced steep bluffs overlooking the shoreline. German machine gun positions commanded nearly every approach. Many of the preliminary air and naval bombardments had missed their intended targets. As the first landing craft approached, the German defenses were still ready. The ramps dropped. Within moments, intense machine gun and artillery fire swept across the beach. Some landing craft were struck before the soldiers inside could even disembark. Others reached the shore only to find themselves pinned down with little cover. Many soldiers were forced to wade through deep water, carrying heavy packs, weapons, and equipment. Some never reached dry land. The carefully timed assault quickly dissolved into confusion. Units became separated. Officers were lost. Radio communication broke down. For a time, it appeared the landings at Omaha might fail altogether. But battles are not always decided by grand strategies. Sometimes, they are decided by small groups of determined people. Combat engineers cleared obstacles under relentless fire. Medics moved from one casualty to another, often exposing themselves to save others. Junior officers and non-commissioned officers gathered scattered soldiers into small assault teams. Instead of waiting for new orders, they began climbing the bluffs. One bunker at a time, one trench at a time, one position at a time. Slowly, the impossible began to change. Further east, British and Canadian forces fought their own battles. At Gold Beach, British troops overcame strong resistance and advanced farther inland than expected. At Juno Beach, Canadian soldiers encountered fierce opposition as they fought through fortified villages and beach defenses. By the end of the day, they had pushed farther inland than almost any other Allied force. At Sword Beach, British troops secured their landing area and began moving toward the city of Cannes. Although every beach presented different challenges, the invasion was succeeding. Slowly, painfully, but steadily. As reports flooded into German headquarters, confusion spread. Some commanders believed Normandy was only a diversion. Others urged an immediate counterattack. But Germany's most powerful armored divisions remained in reserve. Many required Adolf Hitler's personal authorization before they could move. Hitler had not yet given the order. Even now, he remained convinced that the real invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais. The Allied deception was still working, and every passing hour allowed more soldiers, vehicles, and supplies to pour ashore. By the end of the first day, the beaches of Normandy were no longer isolated strips of sand. They had become a bridgehead, a foothold on occupied Europe. The cost had been enormous, but the Atlantic Wall had been breached. The liberation of Western Europe had begun. As darkness began to fall on June 6th, the battle was far from over. The beaches had been taken, but holding them would prove just as difficult as capturing them. Across Normandy, exhausted soldiers dug foxholes into the earth. Engineers worked without pause, clearing mines, repairing roads, and opening exits from the beaches. Every minute mattered, because if the Germans launched a powerful counterattack before enough Allied reinforcements arrived, everything achieved that day could still be lost. In Germany, confusion continued. Throughout the morning, reports from Normandy reached Adolf Hitler's headquarters. Some officers believed the invasion was genuine. Others insisted it was only a diversion. Hitler himself remained convinced that the main Allied attack would come later, at Pas-de-Calais. Because of that belief, some of Germany's strongest panzer divisions were held back. Those precious hours gave the Allies exactly what they needed. Time. Time to land more troops. Time to unload more tanks. Time to strengthen the fragile foothold they had carved into occupied France. By the time German reinforcements arrived, the opportunity to drive the invasion back into the sea had slipped away. Many people imagined that D-Day ended with the landings. In reality, it marked the beginning of an entirely new battle. Normandy's countryside was unlike anything the Allies had expected. Fields were divided by centuries-old hedgerows, thick embankments topped with dense vegetation. Every field became a natural fortress. German defenders used these hedgerows to launch surprise attacks before disappearing behind the next line of cover. Progress slowed dramatically. Some villages changed hands several times. Every mile forward came at a heavy price. The liberation of France would take weeks, not days. The victory at Normandy came with an enormous human cost. On D-Day alone, thousands of Allied soldiers were killed. Many thousands more were wounded or reported missing. German forces also suffered heavy casualties defending the coastline. French civilians, caught in the middle of the fighting, endured bombing, artillery fire, and the destruction of their homes. Behind every number was a person, a son, a daughter, a husband, a brother, a friend, lives interrupted forever by war. As Allied forces pushed deeper into France, something remarkable began to happen. In village after village, French civilians emerged from their homes. Some waved hidden flags they had kept for years. Others embraced soldiers they had never met. Church bells rang. People celebrated openly for the first time since the German occupation had begun. For millions across Europe, liberation had finally begun. The road ahead would still be long, but hope had returned. The success of D-Day changed the course of the Second World War. Within weeks, the Allies had secured Normandy. By August, Paris was liberated. The Western Front was firmly established. Germany now faced powerful Allied armies advancing from the west, while the Soviet Union continued its relentless advance from the east. The Third Reich was being squeezed from both directions. Less than 11 months after D-Day, Nazi Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Today, the beaches of Normandy are peaceful once again. Children play where soldiers once fought. Families walk the shoreline without realizing how much history rests beneath their feet. Across the cliffs overlooking Omaha Beach, rows of white headstones stretch toward the horizon. Each one represents a life, a dream, a family forever changed. These cemeteries are not simply places of mourning. They are reminders of what was sacrificed and of what was ultimately preserved. On the morning of June 6th, 1944, more than 150,000 Allied soldiers crossed the English Channel to challenge one of the most heavily defended coastlines on Earth. They faced uncertainty. They faced overwhelming odds, and many never returned home. But their courage opened the door to the liberation of Western Europe. D-Day did not end the Second World War. It did something just as important. It made the end possible. Nearly 8 decades later, the waves still wash across the beaches of Normandy. The wind still moves through the fields. And history still whispers the story of those who crossed the sea so that others could live in freedom. This was the longest day. Thank you for watching the video. Enjoy the rest of your day.